We are now on Chapter 18, configuring applications using group policy. In this chapter, we will look at group policy and see how group policy can be used for the remote installation of software. We will look at .msi, Microsoft installer files. We will look at software restrictions and at AppLocker in order to deny access to certain programs. As I've mentioned before, the Community College of Baltimore County has 5,000 workstations, and to manually walk around to install Microsoft Office on each individual computer would be tremendously time-consuming and labor-intensive. So what we do is we use group policy. We use group policy to remotely install software on users' workstations so you don't have to walk around to each computer and do it. A .msi file, a Microsoft installer file, is an install program used to install software. And if we put it up on the server, we can use group policy to push it down to the workstations. The .msi file is stored up on a server, and group policy is used to push it down to the workstations. The steps involved in installing software using group policy: first, you put the MSI file on a shared folder on a server. Then you create the new group policy and you specify the source of the .msi file, and then you specify other options. So first, let's look at copying the .msi file to a shared folder. You can see on the C drive of the server, we have a folder called Shared App, and the .msi file is located in that shared folder. This particular MSI file is called Support Tools, but that's not really what the point is. It is an MSI file. It's a Microsoft installer file, and it's used for installing programs. And this particular program I have is called Support Tools. So I need to share it. I right-click on it. I select Properties. Under the Advanced Sharing tab, I click on the checkbox that says Share this folder. I click on OK, and now I have shared the folder on a server that everybody has access to. Then I create the group policy object, which is going to remotely install the software on the workstations. I go to Server Manager, and in Tools, I select Group Policy Management. Now, I could do this for the entire domain, or I could do it for just one organizational unit. In this example, I will just do it for one organizational unit. I right-click on Organizational Unit 1, and I select Create Group Policy, and I give it a name, in this example, Install Software, because I want to install the software for all of the users in Organizational Unit 1. I click on OK. Then I right-click on that new GPO. I click on Edit. I can do this per computer, or I can do it per user. Here's the difference. If you configure this per computer, then the application will necessarily be installed on every computer in the organizational unit as soon as the computer is turned on. Now, if you do it for user configuration, it doesn't really get installed until the user double-clicks on the icon for the application. And here's the advantage of this. If you have 1,000 computers and you know that 100 people are going to need the application, but you don't know which people and which computers it's going to be on, you select user configuration. So when the user double-clicks on the icon, then the application will get installed to the workstation. And if nobody tries to use the application, then it's not going to get installed on the workstation. Some things you do necessarily want to get installed on every single computer. But there are other things you might only want them installed if the user tries to run them. And if the user doesn't use them, then they don't get installed. And of course, that's going to save us on network bandwidth. So let's do that one. We go into User Configurations under Software Settings, and there's our software installation. Currently, there are no items to show. So I right-click and I select New, followed by Package. I select Package. Then I specify where it is, /server1 /shared app is the name of the shared folder. And then the name of the .msi to be installed is called supporttools.msi. I click on OK. Then we can select Publish or Assigned. We typically want Assigned. Published means that the user then has to go into Control Panel and manually install it himself. And we want it to be installed as soon as the user needs it. So we will select Assigned. Assigned means the user will see an icon for it and just clicks on it. Click on OK. So there we have is the .msi file. If I right-click on it and I select Properties, we can see that it is the Windows Support Tools.msi, and the deployment method is it's going to be assigned, not published, and one deployment option is auto-install this application by file extension activation. Here's what that means. Suppose what we're installing here is Microsoft Word, and the user simply double-clicks on a .doc file or a .docx file, which is a Microsoft Word extension. If the user double-clicks on an application which has a Microsoft Word extension, then the workstation will grab the Microsoft installer file and pull it down and install it on the user's local workstation. Another option is uninstall this application when it falls out of the scope of management. Meaning, if this computer or user goes to another organizational unit that this group policy is not configured for, then it will uninstall the application. I will select that option. Maybe you don't care, but in this case, I will select that option. Now, this option right here, install this application at login, it's not a good thing to do in this particular example, because in this particular example, the reason I'm putting it under user configuration is so it won't get installed until the user really needs it. So I will not select this particular option. And then under security, you can see that authenticated users have the read permission, so they can read this group policy object, so they can access it. So the steps involved in installing the software using group policy object is first you put the .msi installer file on a shared folder on a server that everybody can get to. Then you create the new group policy object. You add the software package. It can be per computer or per user. You specify the source server, the shared folder name, and the .msi file. And then you specify other workstations such as it gets uninstalled when the computer moves to another organizational unit, or you could even select install when user logs on. And then when the user logs on, or when the user tries to access the application, then group policy pushes the application down to the workstation. The group policy object pushes the application down to the workstation. Of course, in this example, you might say it is pulled down because it's not really installed until the user double-clicks on it. Preventing users from running software. Now, we just talked about making sure that software will get installed on certain computers. Now let's look at the opposite. Let's look at preventing users from running certain software. There might be certain software that's being used in your organization that you don't want people to use on the job. So what we can do is we can either use software restriction policies for XP and Vista, or we can use AppLocker. AppLocker can be used for Windows 7, 8, and 9. Let's start out with software restriction policies. The purpose of a software restriction policy is to prevent users from running a particular application. It's used with XP and Vista. Let's say there's a particular program that I don't want users to run. This example right here, I will just select this executable right here. It's called dxdiag. So let's say I don't want people to run this application. It's on the C drive under the programs folder. So here's what I would do. Go to Server Manager, go to Tools, go to Group Policy Management. Then I would right-click on an organizational unit, or I could do this domain-wide. Create the group policy object. I will name this group policy object software restriction, followed by OK. Then I right-click on the software restriction group policy object and select Edit. And then under Policies, under Windows Settings, under Security Settings, we go down to the software restriction policies, and we can see that no software restriction policies have been defined. So I will right-click and select New Software Restriction Policies. And then I will select the folder that says Additional Rules. Right-click on that and select New Path Rule, because I want to prevent people from getting to that folder. I click on New Path Rule. And what I want to do is I want to disallow, not allow. I want to disallow access. And I specify Browse, and I go to Computer, and I go to the C drive, and it is this folder right here, the folder called Programs that I don't want people, it is this, in this folder that has the executable I don't want people to have access to. And then I select the executable file. So what we're doing is we're blocking access to simply one single executable file. I'll show you how to do it for an entire folder in just a minute. But right now we're just blocking access to a single executable file. I click on OK and OK. So now we can see the software restriction rule is disallowing access to this executable right here. Software restriction policies can be used to prevent users from running particular applications, and they're used in XP and Vista. And if you have an organization that's running XP and Vista, as many still are, then you would use software restriction policies. But if you're using Windows 7, then you would use AppLocker. AppLocker, conceptually, it's the same as software restriction policies. It's used to prevent people from running certain programs. It's more flexible and it has lower overhead than software restriction policies. AppLocker is compatible with Windows 7, Windows 8, and soon to be released Windows 9, but it is not compatible with Vista and NT. Here at the Community College of Baltimore County, we have completely dumped XT and we've already switched over to Windows 7. We don't plan to go to Windows 8, and we will skip over to Windows 9 when it comes along. So AppLocker would be appropriate for a situation where you don't have NT. To create a rule in AppLocker to allow or disallow access to all programs in an entire folder, what we would do is create a group policy object. In this example, I will go to Organizational Unit 2. Once again, I could do it domain-wide. Right-click, select Create a Group Policy Object, give it a name. I will call it Disallow Applications. Click on OK. Right-click on that new group policy object, click on Edit. Then under Policies, under Windows Settings, under Security Settings, we go down to Application Control Policies, and there is AppLocker. And we see a brief description. AppLocker uses rules and the properties of files to provide access control for applications. So to create an AppLocker rule, we expand AppLocker and we will select executable rules. It prevent certain programs from running. Now, we could prevent certain programs from installing altogether. We could block scripts. We could block packaged apps. In this example, I will show how to block an executable file. So I go to executable rules. Under executable rules, we see that there currently are no executable rules. I right-click and I select Create Default Rules. And it creates the default rules that you would expect. All users have access to files in the Program Files folder, and all users have access to files in the Windows folder. And then the administrators have access to everything. But what I want to do is block access. So I will right-click on Executable Rules and select Create New Rule. This wizard helps you create an AppLocker rule. Click on Next. Select the action to use and the user or group that this rule should apply to. What I want to do is I want to deny access to this particular folder, and I want to deny access to everyone. I could select one user, I could select one group. In this case, I will deny access to everyone. Click on Next. This will be a path rule, a particular folder that I don't want people to access. I click on Next. Then I specify the path, so not file. I'm not blocking one single file. That would be Browse Files. I'm blocking an entire folder. I click on Browse Folders, and I go down and I select the Programs folder is what I want to block access to, not Programs Files. That's something else. I want to block access to the Programs folder. And then I click on Next. Do I want to add an exception? Not now. Talk about that later. I click on Next. That will be the name. I can optionally give it a description. OS drive just means the C drive. All files in the Programs folder. I click on Create. And there is the new rule that I have created to block access. It says Deny Everyone. If I right-click on that and look at Properties, we can see that this AppLocker rule is denying access to everyone for all files in the Programs file of the C drive. AppLocker Exceptions. What if you do want to allow people to access just one particular folder, or one particular file in that folder full of files that you otherwise don't want them to have access to? Now you might say, well then just put that file in a totally different folder. Well, let's say you do want to give them access to one file in a folder which is otherwise blocked. So to allow access to one program in the folder, you create an exception. To create an exception, we go to our executable rules, and there is our deny rule, the one we just created. And if I right-click on that guy and select Properties, okay, right, there's the rule, deny everyone access, and I select Exceptions. I could then click on the type of exception that it's going to be, which is going to be a path rule, followed by Add, and then I will select Browse Files. I will go into the folder where access is blocked, and I will select the one file that I do want people to have access. In this example, I'm using a program called the DXDiag. Then I click on Open, and I click on OK. So now we can see we have created an exception. AppLocker Exceptions. An exception allows access to one program in a folder which is otherwise blocked. Rule enforcement audit versus enforce. If we go into AppLocker, under Configure Rule Enforcement, if we click on the item that says Configure Rule Enforcement, we can see that the rules are not enforced. To enforce the executable rules, I click on the checkbox. And what enforce means is deny access to that particular file or folder. Now, if I select audit only, that would not deny access. It would just track who accessed that folder. But in this case, I want to block access altogether. So that's why we will select enforce rules as opposed to simply audit. Publisher rules. We've talked about path rules. Publisher rules are used to enforce a minimum version of an application. In this computer, you can see I am currently using Windows Explorer, Internet Explorer 11. Many organizations require a minimum level of the Internet Explorer for the apps to run. Some organizations require a minimum of Internet Explorer 8. They don't want to see Internet Explorer 7, for example. So what we can do is we can create a publisher rule, whereas a path rule said either this file can run or it can't run. A publisher rule says that an application can run based upon its version. So we can create a publisher rule that will disallow Windows Internet Explorer version 7 and below. Here are our executable rules. And if I right-click under executable rules and select add new rules, we wanted to deny access to everyone. And this is not a path rule, but a publisher rule, which specifies the version of a particular program. So we select publisher rule followed by next. We browse. We go under the C drive, under the program files folder, and there we have Internet Explorer.exe. I click on open. Then I select use custom values, and I type in the minimum version that we want people to run, or Windows, or we don't want them to run, Windows Internet Explorer 7. And then to the left where it says and above, I select the drop down and select and below. So what we are doing is we're denying access to Internet Explorer version 7 and below. Of course, another way we could do it is we could allow access to version Internet Explorer 8 and above. So I will select and below, followed by create. We will not add an exception, followed by next. That's the name of the rule, Internet Explorer.exe. I could type a description. I click on create, and now you can see we have created an AppLocker rule that denies everyone access to Internet Explorer version 7 and below, and that's called a publisher rule. AppLocker can control access to software. It can allow or deny. We can specify path rules. We can specify publisher rules, and hash rules are used to protect the integrity of the file such that users are not using files which have been corrupted or adulterated. Chapter 18, summary. In this chapter, we looked at group policy, how group policy can be used for the remote installation of software, and that a .msi file, a Microsoft installer file, is what's stored on the server in a shared folder, and group policy is used to push it down to the workstations. Software restrictions, which are used in Windows XP and Windows Vista, and AppLocker, which are used in Windows 7, 8, and 9, are used to allow or deny access to particular programs that we don't want users to use. And this concludes Chapter 18. Thank you very much.